Have you ever wondered why the Bible completely skips over 17 crucial years of Jesus Christ's life? Why would the most important figure in human history disappear from all historical records between the ages of 12 and 30, only to emerge as a fully realized spiritual master capable of performing miracles that defied every known law of nature? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. What you're about to discover might surprise you, because the answers to these questions have been hidden in plain sight for over 80 years, preserved in the most extraordinary collection of supernatural revelations ever documented by modern science. Edgar Cayce, known as America's sleeping prophet and the most thoroughly documented psychic in human history, received over 14,000 readings while in deep trance states that would forever change how we understand Christ's true mission on earth. Has this ever happened to you? You're reading the Gospels and suddenly realize there's this massive gap in Jesus' story. One moment, he's a 12-year-old boy, amazing the temple scholars with his wisdom, and the next he's 30 years old, appearing at the Jordan River with John the Baptist, as if he'd been preparing for this moment his entire life. Where was he? What was he doing? How did he acquire the profound spiritual knowledge that would allow him to heal the sick, raise the dead, and speak with an authority that even his enemies couldn't deny? The Edgar Cayce Foundation in Virginia Beach has carefully guarded these supernatural revelations for over 8 decades, creating an unprecedented archive that reads like something from another dimension. These aren't vague prophecies or mystical poetry. They're specific, detailed accounts of Jesus' missing years that were channeled from what Cayce called the Akashic Records, the universal memory bank containing the experiences of every soul that has ever lived. Stay with me until the end, because what emerges from these documented readings will challenge everything mainstream Christianity has taught us about the nature of Christ himself. Reading 574914, given in 1941 while Cayce was in his deepest trance state, reveals that Jesus spent those mysterious 17 years traveling to India, Egypt, and Persia, studying under masters who taught him the deepest secrets of consciousness, reincarnation, and the true nature of divine love. But this isn't just another theory about Jesus' missing years. These readings describe specific temples where he studied, the names he used, the spiritual disciplines he mastered, and most shocking of all, the revolutionary teachings about reincarnation and Christ consciousness that were later removed from Christian doctrine by early church councils who feared losing their power over believers. What you're about to learn will transform not just how you read the Bible, but how you understand your own spiritual potential, because according to these extraordinary revelations, the path that Jesus walked is still available to every human soul today, and the transformation he underwent during those hidden years reveals the blueprint for our own spiritual awakening. When you subscribe here, you're joining a community that understands there's so much more to spirituality than what we've been taught. These conversations can genuinely transform how you see your divine potential. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because what Cayce revealed about Jesus' journey will completely shift your mindset about what's possible for human consciousness. During his time in the sacred temples of India, Jesus didn't simply observe from the sidelines like a curious traveler. He immersed himself completely in the ancient wisdom traditions, studying under the name Jeshua in the legendary temple of Jagannath, where he mastered meditation techniques so advanced that they could alter the very fabric of reality. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn that reveals the true depth of Jesus' revolutionary thinking. While the greatest Eastern masters of his time taught that enlightenment meant escaping the physical world, viewing material existence as nothing more than an illusion to transcend, Jesus arrived at a completely different conclusion that would forever change the trajectory of spiritual evolution on this planet. The hidden truth behind Jesus' transformation lies in this profound realization. Instead of seeing the physical realm as a prison to escape from, he understood it as a divine classroom where souls could learn to express love in its most tangible form. This wasn't just a philosophical shift in thinking, it was a complete paradigm revolution that challenged thousands of years of spiritual tradition. Where other masters sought to dissolve into formless consciousness, Jesus saw the incredible potential of bringing divine love into concrete reality through healing, service, and transformation of human suffering. This fundamental difference in approach explains why Jesus later performed physical healings rather than simply teaching people to transcend their bodies. He had discovered something the Eastern masters missed entirely, that the material world wasn't an obstacle to overcome, but the very stage where divine consciousness could express its creative power most dramatically. Every miracle he would later perform was rooted in this revolutionary understanding that consciousness and matter could work together rather than against each other. The impact of this realization rippled through every aspect of his teaching and would eventually reshape humanity's understanding of what it means to be spiritual in a physical world. Behind the scenes of his public ministry lay years of intensive preparation where he learned to bridge the gap between mystical experience and practical transformation. This journey of inner and outer mastery reveals why Jesus' message resonated so powerfully with ordinary people rather than just spiritual elites. He had found the secret to making divine love accessible in everyday human experience. Write in the comments, "This changes everything for me," if you're beginning to see how this hidden truth transforms our understanding of spiritual growth. The decisions Jesus made during these formative years would lead him to teach something so revolutionary that it would be systematically erased from Christian history within just a few centuries. Behind the scenes of his public ministry lay a hidden truth so powerful that religious authorities would spend generations trying to bury it completely. Here's where the revelations become truly explosive. Jesus didn't just revolutionize how we understand the relationship between spirit and matter. He taught his inner circle of disciples that human souls return to earth multiple times to learn and grow spiritually. This wasn't borrowed from Eastern philosophy. This was his own profound insight into the nature of divine justice and infinite love. Reading 2067 from Cayce's documented sessions reveals that reincarnation formed the very foundation of Jesus' understanding about how consciousness evolves and why suffering exists in the world. But the impact of this teaching went far beyond simple doctrine. Jesus presented reincarnation in a way that completely transformed how his followers understood their own spiritual journey. While Eastern traditions often portrayed the cycle of rebirth as suffering to escape from, as endless imprisonment in physical form, Jesus revealed it as something entirely different. God's ultimate gift of unlimited opportunities for every soul to perfect itself and express divine love more fully with each lifetime. This paradigm shift changes everything about how we view our current challenges and relationships. Every difficult situation becomes a classroom. Every person we encounter becomes a teacher, and every struggle becomes an opportunity for consciousness to expand and mature. The journey of spiritual evolution suddenly makes sense in a way that a single lifetime simply cannot contain. What makes this revelation even more shocking is how it was deliberately removed from Christian teachings. The early church councils, particularly around 325 AD, made calculated decisions to erase these concepts from official doctrine because they threatened the very foundation of institutional control. If people understood they had multiple lifetimes to develop their relationship with God directly, why would they need intermediaries? If souls could progress through their own spiritual efforts across many incarnations, what happened to the monopoly on salvation? The transformation in understanding is staggering. When you realize that Jesus' message of hope and redemption becomes infinitely more logical and compassionate through this lens. No soul is ever lost, no mistake is ever final, and every individual has exactly as much time as needed to awaken to their divine nature. Write in the comments, multiple chances make sense if this hidden teaching resonates with your understanding of divine love and justice. The transformation in perspective becomes even more profound when you realize that Jesus' miraculous abilities weren't exclusive gifts reserved for divine beings, but demonstrations of spiritual laws that every human consciousness can access through proper understanding and training. This hidden truth changes the entire foundation of how we approach healing, manifestation, and personal transformation. Behind the scenes of every miracle Jesus performed lay a deeper understanding of how consciousness interacts with physical reality. Reading 574-98 from Cayce's documented sessions reveals that what appeared supernatural to observers was actually the natural result of mastering principles that govern the relationship between mind, spirit, and matter. Jesus had learned during his years of intensive study that illness, suffering, and limitation aren't random occurrences or divine punishments, but direct reflections of spiritual imbalance within consciousness itself. This revelation completely shifts our mindset about health and healing, because it means that transformation is always possible when we understand the root causes operating behind physical symptoms. Jesus recognized that every disease pattern begins in the spiritual realm before manifesting in the body, and healing occurs when consciousness realigns with the frequency of divine love and perfect wholeness. The impact of this understanding becomes undeniable when you examine the documented results that Edgar Cayce achieved using these same principles throughout his lifetime of medical readings. Reading 31:24-1 provides a perfect example that demonstrates how these spiritual laws operate in practical terms. A woman diagnosed with terminal cancer was given specific guidance that addressed not just her physical condition, but the underlying spiritual and mental patterns that had created the disease. The fact that you've resonated with these hidden truths tells me this content was meant for you. Hitting like isn't just supporting the video, it's saying yes to more revelations about human potential. Her journey of healing required 3 fundamental decisions, shifting her mental attitude from fear to faith, following precise dietary recommendations that supported her body's natural healing mechanisms, and establishing a daily practice of prayer and meditation that connected her consciousness with divine healing energy. Within 6 months, medical examinations could find no trace of cancer anywhere in her body. What makes this case so remarkable isn't just the physical healing, but how it reveals the systematic approach that Jesus himself used to restore wholeness in those who came to him. The same principles of consciousness alignment, faith activation, and spiritual practice that created miraculous healings 2,000 years ago continue to operate today for anyone willing to understand and apply them. Write in the comments, healing is available to everyone. If you're beginning to see how these spiritual principles could transform your own relationship with health and well-being. The journey into these revelations becomes even more personal and profound when Edgar Cayce himself disclosed something that left even his most experienced stenographers speechless. During reading 294-8, while in his deepest trance state, Cayce revealed his own past life connection to this extraordinary story. He had actually been present during Jesus' lifetime as a member of the mystical Essene community where Jesus received his foundational spiritual training. This revelation transforms everything about how we understand the authenticity and accuracy of these readings, because Cayce wasn't channeling information about distant historical events. He was accessing memories from his own soul's journey through that pivotal period in human history. The impact of this disclosure means that every detail about Jesus' preparation and mission comes from the perspective of someone who witnessed it firsthand, someone who was part of the sacred community that recognized and nurtured the incoming Christ consciousness. The hidden truth about Jesus' mission becomes even more remarkable when you realize that his incarnation wasn't a random divine intervention, but the culmination of an incredibly sophisticated spiritual preparation that spanned multiple lifetimes and involved an entire community of advanced souls working behind the scenes. Reading 1472-1 reveals that even Mary, his mother, wasn't chosen by chance, but was specially prepared by the Essenes from the age of 4 through intensive training in meditation, prayer, and spiritual purification that would make her consciousness capable of conceiving and raising such an evolved soul. This level of planning and preparation challenges our entire mindset about how divine missions unfold on earth. Mary's transformation from ordinary child to spiritually prepared vessel required years of dedicated practice and consciousness development that few people today could even imagine. Her decisions to surrender completely to this spiritual training created the foundation that made Jesus' incarnation possible. But the most mind-shifting revelation concerns Jesus' own soul preparation across multiple lifetimes. Reading 1017 documents that before his birth as Jesus, this soul had already achieved extraordinary spiritual development through many previous incarnations, each one building the consciousness and mastery necessary for his ultimate mission as the Christ. Every lifetime had been strategically designed to develop specific spiritual capabilities that would be essential for demonstrating divine love in human form. The transformation that Jesus underwent wasn't the result of a single lifetime of spiritual practice, but the flowering of consciousness that had been cultivating itself across centuries of focused incarnations. Write in the comments. The preparation was incredible if you're amazed by the depth of planning that went into bringing Christ consciousness to earth. The transformation that occurred during those famous 40 days in the wilderness reveals the most extraordinary aspect of Jesus' preparation for his public ministry. Reading 14723 documents that what appeared to observers as simple fasting and prayer was actually something far more profound. Jesus was accessing the Akashic records, downloading the accumulated wisdom and experiences of every soul that had ever lived on earth. This hidden truth about those 40 days completely reshapes our understanding of how Jesus acquired the spiritual authority that would later astonish even his enemies. Behind the scenes of what seemed like solitary meditation lay the most comprehensive spiritual education possible, direct access to the universal memory bank containing the lessons, insights, and evolution of human consciousness across all of history. The impact of this revelation becomes even more staggering when you understand that Jesus' famous declaration, "Before Abraham was, I am," wasn't just a bold claim of divinity, but an expression of his conscious awareness of his soul's eternal journey through multiple lifetimes. Reading 364-151 reveals that Jesus possessed complete memory of his previous incarnations, understanding his identity not just as a man born in Bethlehem, but as an ancient consciousness that had been guiding humanity's spiritual evolution for millennia. If these revelations have opened your mind to new spiritual possibilities, subscribing means you'll never miss the deeper truths that most people aren't ready to hear. This is where souls serious about awakening come to discover what's really happening. This mindset shift transforms everything about how we interpret his teachings and authority, because Jesus spoke from the accumulated wisdom of countless lifetimes of spiritual development. Every parable, every healing, every moment of divine demonstration flowed from this vast reservoir of experience that spanned the entire arc of human history. But the most mind-blowing revelation comes from reading 364-5, which documents that the soul of Jesus had previously incarnated as some of the most significant figures in biblical history. This consciousness had walked the earth as Adam, experiencing the very beginning of human spiritual awakening, and later as Enoch, the mysterious patriarch who achieved such complete spiritual mastery that he was taken directly to heaven without experiencing physical death. The decisions this soul made across these lifetimes created a pattern of increasingly perfect spiritual expression that culminated in the Jesus Incarnation. Every challenge faced as Adam, every breakthrough achieved as Enoch, every lesson learned across countless other incarnations contributed to the consciousness that would eventually demonstrate the ultimate possibility of human-divine unity. This journey of soul development reveals that the entire biblical narrative becomes the story of one consciousness progressively mastering the art of expressing divine love in human form. Write in the comments, one soul's journey through time. If this revelation about Jesus' multiple incarnations is expanding your perspective on spiritual evolution. The revelation that the entire biblical narrative represents one soul's progressive journey toward perfect divine expression transforms our understanding of Scripture itself. Every major spiritual figure in the Old Testament wasn't just preparing the way for someone else's arrival. They were actually earlier incarnations of the same consciousness that would eventually manifest as Jesus, the Christ. This hidden truth means that when we read about the spiritual victories and struggles of biblical patriarchs, we're witnessing the gradual evolution of Christ consciousness itself across thousands of years. This perspective shift changes everything about how we interpret the patterns and themes running through biblical history, because they represent the learning curve of one incredibly dedicated soul, mastering the art of expressing divine love in increasingly challenging circumstances. Each incarnation built upon the lessons of the previous ones, creating a masterful progression toward the ultimate demonstration of human divine unity. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because Jesus' time in India reveals how this ancient soul approached spiritual mastery with a revolutionary mindset that would forever change humanity's understanding of enlightenment. Reading 57498 documents that during his studies in Indian temples, Jesus learned about karma, reincarnation, and the fundamental unity of all souls. But most importantly, he discovered that every human being has the potential to achieve Christ consciousness, the awareness of their own divine nature. The impact of this realization cannot be overstated, because it means that Jesus' mission wasn't to be worshipped as uniquely divine, but to demonstrate what every soul can eventually become. His journey through Indian spiritual traditions gave him the tools to understand consciousness, development, but his own insights transformed how these tools could be used. Behind the scenes of his spiritual education, Jesus made decisions that challenged even the greatest Eastern masters of his time. While these enlightened teachers insisted that all desire leads to suffering and must be eliminated, Jesus developed a more nuanced understanding that would revolutionize spiritual practice. He realized that selfish desire indeed causes suffering, but selfless desire, the longing to serve, heal and love others, actually becomes the very fuel for spiritual evolution and consciousness expansion. This breakthrough in understanding explains why Jesus later taught through active service rather than withdrawal from the world, and why his path emphasized transformation of suffering rather than escape from it. Write in the comments, service is the path. If you recognize how selfless desire can become a powerful force for spiritual growth in your own life. This revolutionary approach to spiritual development led Jesus to seek even deeper initiation experiences that would prepare him for the ultimate demonstration of consciousness transcending physical limitations. His journey took him to Egypt, where reading 294-150 reveals that the Great Pyramid served not as a tomb, but as the most sophisticated temple of initiation ever constructed on Earth. The transformation that occurred within those ancient chambers represents perhaps the most crucial preparation for Jesus' later ministry. Behind the scenes of what tourists see today as massive stone blocks lay precise geometric configurations designed to facilitate altered states of consciousness so profound that initiates could experience symbolic death and resurrection while still in physical form. Jesus underwent these same initiations that had been used for thousands of years to prepare advanced souls for their greatest spiritual challenges. The impact of this experience cannot be understated because it gave Jesus something that no amount of philosophical study could provide: direct personal knowledge of what happens to consciousness when it separates from the physical body. Through these mystical training procedures in the ancient mystery schools, Jesus had actually experienced his consciousness surviving physical death, traveling to spiritual realms, and returning with complete memory of the journey. This hidden truth explains why Jesus could later speak with such absolute authority about eternal life and resurrection. He wasn't sharing theoretical beliefs or faith-based hopes. He was describing realities he had personally experienced and mastered during his years of preparation. Every statement he made about life after death came from first-hand knowledge gained through these incredible initiation processes. The mindset shift this creates is enormous because it means that when Jesus taught about the kingdom of heaven, he wasn't describing some distant afterlife destination. Reading 365:31 documents that Jesus consistently taught the kingdom of heaven as a state of consciousness achievable right here on earth. The profound realization that you are an eternal soul currently having a human experience, not a human being hoping for a spiritual future. This understanding transforms everything about how we approach spiritual practice, because it means that divine consciousness isn't something we earn through good behavior or achieve after death, but something we can access and embody in this very moment through the right decisions about where to focus our awareness. Write in the comments, "Heaven is here now," if this teaching about the kingdom of heaven as present consciousness resonates with your own spiritual understanding. The profound understanding Jesus gained through these initiatory experiences transformed how he would later communicate spiritual truths to humanity. His decision to teach through parables wasn't simply to make complex ideas more accessible to ordinary people. Reading 206-114 reveals these stories contained sophisticated encoded instructions for achieving higher states of consciousness that could only be fully understood by those ready for advanced spiritual development. The transformation in perspective becomes extraordinary when you realize that familiar stories like the prodigal son actually represent the soul's journey through multiple lifetimes, gradually awakening from the illusion of separation and returning to conscious unity with divine love. Every parable contained layers of meaning that spoke to listeners at their current level of understanding, while simultaneously planting seeds for future spiritual breakthroughs. This hidden truth about Jesus' teaching methodology reveals the incredible sophistication behind what appeared to be simple storytelling. Each parable served as a consciousness activation tool, designed to trigger recognition of spiritual principles that listeners carried deep within their own souls, from previous incarnations and mystical experiences. If this deep dive has shifted something in your understanding of Jesus and your spiritual journey, that like button acknowledges the connection we've created and helps this message reach other searching souls. The impact of this understanding extends far beyond biblical interpretation because it shows us that Jesus' miracles operated according to the same encoded principles. Reading 281-63 explains that what appeared to be supernatural violations of natural law were actually demonstrations of spiritual laws operating at a higher frequency than physical laws. Jesus wasn't breaking the rules of reality. He was showing how consciousness creates reality when perfectly aligned with divine love. Behind the scenes of every healing, every multiplication of loaves and fishes, every moment of apparent impossibility lay the systematic application of principles that Jesus had mastered during his years of intensive preparation. These weren't random displays of divine power, but carefully orchestrated teaching moments designed to awaken others to their own potential for consciousness-directed transformation. The documented evidence that these same principles continue to work today provides remarkable validation of Jesus's approach. Reading 2:15-36 recorded the case of a paralyzed man whose physical condition was directly caused by years of accumulated anger and resentment. When he made the decision to forgive those who had hurt him and began practicing daily meditation focused on divine love, his paralysis gradually disappeared over 6 months, demonstrating the same spiritual laws that Jesus used 2,000 years ago. Write in the comments, "Forgiveness heals everything." If you've experienced the transformative power of releasing resentment in your own journey toward wholeness. The breakthrough in understanding that forgiveness creates healing leads us directly to the most revolutionary aspect of Jesus's spiritual practice, his completely transformed approach to prayer itself. Reading 2:62-14 documents that Jesus didn't pray to some distant external God in the sky, but instead used prayer as a method of attuning to the divine presence that already existed within himself and all creation, recognizing that every soul contains this same divine spark waiting to be awakened. This mindset shift changes everything about how we understand spiritual connection, because Jesus's prayers weren't requests made to an outside authority, but alignments with the infinite creative power that flows through all consciousness. His decisions about how to pray reflected his deep understanding that divinity wasn't separate from humanity, but was the very essence of what human souls truly are beneath all surface appearances and conditioning. The transformation that occurred through this approach to prayer reveals the secret behind Jesus's unlimited power to heal, transform, and transcend physical limitations. Reading 281:41 explains that when Jesus spoke the words, "Not my will, but thine be done," he wasn't surrendering to some external deity's agenda, but was actually aligning his human personality completely with his own divine soul, allowing Christ consciousness to flow through him without any resistance from ego-based thinking. Behind the scenes of every miracle lay this fundamental practice of ego dissolution and divine alignment that Jesus had perfected through years of intensive spiritual discipline. The impact of this surrender wasn't weakness or submission, but the activation of unlimited creative power that becomes available when human consciousness stops interfering with divine consciousness. This revelation leads to perhaps the most profound truth that Edgar Cayce channeled about Jesus' mission. Reading 1158:5 documented that Christ isn't just the name of one historical person, but represents a level of consciousness that any soul can eventually achieve through dedicated spiritual development. Jesus became the Christ by perfectly expressing divine love in human form, but this same potential exists within every human being currently walking the earth. The journey toward Christ consciousness becomes available to anyone willing to follow the same path of inner alignment, ego surrender, and service to divine love that Jesus demonstrated throughout his incarnation. Write in the comments, "I have Christ potential," if you're ready to embrace the truth that this same consciousness lives within your own soul, waiting to be awakened. The recognition of this divine potential within every soul leads directly to the most misunderstood aspect of Jesus' entire mission. Reading 253:37 reveals that Jesus came not to be worshipped as uniquely divine, but to be followed as a way shower, demonstrating what every human consciousness can eventually become. His true message wasn't believe in me and be saved, but rather learn what I learned, do what I do, and become what I have become. This transformation in understanding completely revolutionizes Christianity because it shifts the focus from passive belief to active spiritual development. Jesus' decisions about how to teach and demonstrate divine principles were always designed to awaken others to their own potential, rather than create dependency on his unique status. Behind the scenes of every teaching moment lay his deep desire to see humanity step into their own divine authority, rather than remain spiritual children forever. The impact of this revelation becomes even more profound when you understand what Jesus really meant by being born again. Reading 262:36 explains that this isn't a one-time religious experience that guarantees eternal salvation, but represents the ongoing process of awakening to your divine nature and learning to express Christ consciousness in every aspect of daily life. This mindset shift transforms spiritual practice from a weekend activity into a continuous journey of consciousness expansion that touches every decision, every relationship, and every moment of awareness. Being born again becomes the gradual dissolution of everything that keeps us from recognizing and expressing our true divine identity. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because Jesus' most remarkable prophecy reveals the ultimate purpose behind his entire mission on earth. Reading 39:7-6-29 documented his extraordinary promise that greater works than these shall you do, explaining that once humanity truly understands the spiritual principles he was demonstrating, we would develop the ability to heal, transform, and evolve beyond anything currently imaginable. This hidden truth about humanity's destiny means that Jesus' miracles weren't the peak of human spiritual potential, but simply the first demonstrations of what becomes possible when consciousness operates from its true divine nature. His journey through multiple lifetimes of preparation was designed to blaze a trail that millions of souls would eventually follow, each one adding their own unique expression of Christ consciousness to the collective awakening of human civilization. Write in the comments, "Ready for greater works," if you feel called to develop the same spiritual abilities that Jesus demonstrated during his revolutionary ministry. The prophecy about humanity developing greater spiritual abilities points to an even more extraordinary vision that Jesus carried throughout his mission. Reading 14:7-1 reveals that Jesus foresaw a future time when millions of souls would achieve Christ consciousness simultaneously, creating a spiritual renaissance that would completely transform civilization itself. This wasn't just hopeful thinking about distant possibilities, but a clear vision of humanity's inevitable destiny based on his understanding of consciousness evolution. The transformation that this mass awakening would create goes far beyond individual healing and personal enlightenment. Behind the scenes of current world events, this spiritual renaissance has already begun as more people awaken to their divine nature and begin expressing the same consciousness that Jesus demonstrated 2,000 years ago. The impact of millions of souls simultaneously recognizing their true identity as divine beings would revolutionize every aspect of human civilization: politics, economics, relationships, technology, and our entire approach to life on Earth. This hidden truth about humanity's collective spiritual destiny makes Jesus' core teaching even more urgently relevant for our current times. Reading 262-103 documents that his most important message was never about believing in him as an external savior, but about awakening to your own divine nature and recognizing that all humans are children of God with the same capacity to express divine love that he demonstrated. The mindset shift this creates is enormous because it means that spiritual development isn't about earning divine approval or following external religious rules, but about remembering and expressing who you already are at the deepest level of your being. Every soul carries this same Christ potential, and the decisions you make about whether to develop this consciousness directly impact the timing and intensity of the collective awakening that Jesus prophesied. But this leads us to one of the most disturbing revelations about how these original teachings were systematically suppressed. Reading 294-192 explains that the early Christian church gradually moved away from Jesus' mystical teachings about direct divine connection because they threatened existing religious power structures. Church leaders discovered it was far easier to control people by making them dependent on external religious authority than to teach them how to access their own divine consciousness. The journey from Jesus' original empowering message to institutional Christianity represents one of the greatest spiritual cover-ups in human history. Write in the comments, time to reclaim the truth, if you're ready to move beyond institutional limitations and connect directly with the Christ consciousness that lives within your own soul. The systematic suppression of Jesus' empowering teachings reached its most calculated and devastating peak during the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Reading 254-87 reveals that this gathering of church leaders deliberately removed all references to reincarnation from Christian doctrine for one simple yet shocking reason. They feared that if people understood their direct connection to God through multiple lifetimes of spiritual development, they would no longer need priests, bishops, or any external religious authority whatsoever. This transformation from spiritual empowerment to institutional dependency represents one of the most successful control strategies in human history. The decisions made during this council weren't based on divine revelation or theological truth, but on calculated political maneuvering designed to preserve power structures that would generate wealth and influence for centuries to come. Behind the scenes of official church doctrine lay the deliberate burial of humanity's greatest spiritual inheritance, the knowledge that every soul has unlimited opportunities to develop Christ consciousness directly. The impact of this cover-up becomes even more profound when you understand what Jesus actually meant when he promised to send the Holy Spirit. Reading 1472-1 documents that Jesus knew his original teachings would be distorted and suppressed, which is why he promised this divine helper. But the Holy Spirit isn't a separate divine being floating around in the heavens. It's the very Christ consciousness that Jesus achieved, now available as a living spiritual network to help all souls awaken to their true divine nature. This hidden truth means that the help Jesus promised is more accessible and practical than most people imagine. The Holy Spirit represents the accumulated wisdom and consciousness of Jesus himself, combined with all souls who have achieved Christ consciousness throughout history, creating a spiritual support system that responds to sincere seekers ready to walk the path of awakening. The journey toward developing this consciousness doesn't require years of theological study or complex religious rituals. Reading 262-3 provides the same specific meditation instructions that Jesus himself practiced during his years of preparation. The transformation begins with simple daily practices. Sit quietly in a peaceful space, focus your awareness on your natural breathing rhythm, and repeat the phrase, "God is love," until you feel divine presence awakening within your heart. Most importantly, practice unconditional love in all your relationships, because this becomes the fastest way to align human consciousness with divine consciousness. But perhaps the most remarkable revelation concerns how this connection remains available today. Reading 262-114 documents that Jesus established what can only be described as a Christ consciousness grid around the entire earth, a spiritual network that any sincere seeker can access through prayer and meditation. This isn't just ancient history or mystical theory, but a living reality that continues to guide humanity's spiritual evolution in our current times. Write in the comments, "I feel the connection," if you've experienced moments of divine a presence during your own meditation or prayer practice. The profound truth that this Christ consciousness grid remains active and accessible today transforms everything about your spiritual journey from this moment forward. You're not alone in this awakening process, and you're certainly not the first soul to feel drawn to these deeper truths about Jesus' real mission and humanity's divine potential. If you've stayed with me through this entire exploration of Edgar Cayce's revolutionary revelations, it tells me something important about who you are and where you're headed on your own spiritual path. The fact that these hidden truths resonate with your consciousness suggests that you're already beginning to remember your own divine nature and feel the stirring of Christ consciousness within your heart. This is exactly why I create content like this, to reach souls who are ready for something deeper than surface-level spirituality, people who sense there's more to the story than what conventional religion teaches. When you subscribe to this channel, you're joining a community of awakening souls who understand that spiritual growth is an active journey, not a passive belief system. The connection we've shared through these revelations deserves to be acknowledged. So if you found value in discovering how Jesus' true mission relates to your own spiritual potential, I genuinely appreciate you hitting that like button. It helps these transformative messages reach other souls who are searching for the same deeper understanding that brought you here today. And if you made it all the way to the end of this journey with me, write in the comments, "This message was meant for me," because honestly, it probably was. The fact that you're here right now, learning these truths, isn't a coincidence. There's a video right here that dives even deeper into how you can actually begin developing the same abilities that Jesus demonstrated during his ministry. The practical steps are simpler than you might think, and the results can be absolutely life-changing. Click and continue with me over there, because your spiritual awakening is just getting started.